so that they could present it to the Diet and to the people as the Japanese government's draft.
To do the job, MacArthur gave the government section 6 days.
Well, I never thought we could do it. Once I heard him say he wants it by the end of the week. I was thinking in terms of a month or 6 weeks.
This was the opportunity that many people would really give their right arms for, because here the small group of people were invested with the responsibility of drafting a constitution for one of the great nations of the world.
Here we were, a group of officers, although not a single one of us was a career officer, but still we were hardly comparable to the founding fathers who drafted our Constitution in the U.S., and we knew that.
There were 24 authors, among them a congressman, a novelist, a newspaperman, a doctor, 2 academics, and 5 lawyers. No one had any constitutional expertise.
I guess I was picked because I had a freshly minted PhD in politics from Princeton. And maybe because Chuck Hades wanted another Cornell alumnus.
There were 8 civilians. The civilians were picked pretty much by random, except for one young woman by the name of Beata Sirota, who had lived in Japan, so she knew what it was to live in a police state. Consequently, she was assigned to the Civil Liberties Committee.
When we were given this task, I thought, my goodness, we have to have some prototypes. And I took a Jeep and a driver, and I drove from one university library to the other and gathered up as many constitutions as I could. Of course, I didn't want to gather up all the constitutions in one library because it might make the librarian suspicious. So I came back, I think, with maybe 10, 12 constitutions.
Richard Poole was born on Hirohito's birthday. He was chosen to write the new constitutional role of the emperor.
You can't help but ponder the role of a young ensign in drafting provisions that will govern the functions of the imperial throne and the emperor. Well, it is rather a large order to swallow. We didn't want him to be just window dressing. On the other hand, we didn't want to give him the powers that he had under the previous constitution. We finally arrived at the term that the emperor is the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people.
Memories of the war haunted the Constitution. Article 9 called on Japan to lay down its arms forever.
It's very difficult to require a country forever and a day to forswear armed forces, even in self-defense. So I raised a question, and Colonel Cadiz looked at me and said, "Poole, do you know where that draft comes from?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "The general." And he said, "Need I say anything more?" I said, "No, sir."
MacArthur was concerned with his place in history. And wouldn't it be remarkable that a military man was able to induce a society like Japan to renounce armaments?
I therefore commend Japan's proposal for the renunciation of war to the thoughtful consideration of all of the peoples of the world.
It's worked out greatly to the advantage of the Japanese, because while we spend 6+% of our GNP for military purposes, they've held theirs to 1%.
The article on women's rights was written by Beata Sirota.
The idea that a woman couldn't decide whom she wanted to marry, the idea that she couldn't divorce a man, that she really had no rights as far as property was concerned, was very disturbing to me. And so I wrote in many very specific rights, such as even prenatal care and maternity leave and all kinds of things of that type, which appear in many other constitutions in the world, not in the American Constitution. But when we presented this to the steering committee, which was made up all of men, said that this went further than the American Constitution and was too specific.
The provisions went into great detail, almost like a Social Security law, and so we struck them out.
And I argued for quite some time, and I think I even cried a little bit.
She was very emotional about this. Here I am in uniform, with a 20 slip of a girl, really weeping.
And finally, the steering committee said, well, they would incorporate the main rights that I had written down.
Women's rights? Changing the role of the emperor? These radical changes never occurred to Japan's conservative government, including future Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida. Then Yoshida and the others saw the new American version.
The reaction of the Japanese was one of complete astonishment. They were dumbfounded. General Whitney passed 4 copies out to them so that they could read the draft, and said, now we know you want to read this and consider it, so my staff and I will go into the garden. When Shirasu came to bring us back, he said to Whitney, we're sorry we've kept you so long standing out here. And Whitney said, oh, think nothing of it. We've been enjoying your atomic sunshine. At which point, incidentally, a B-29 flew over the foreign minister's residence rather low. I thought it certainly had a persuasive element.
Japan's conservative government hated the new constitution, but they were in a bind because elections were coming up. And according to national polls, most Japanese firmly backed its principles. If the government continued to resist, SCAP threatened to put the American draft before the Japanese people. The government gave in and presented the Constitution as a Japanese draft. Few people were fooled. Newspapers said, "It smells of butter," meaning distinctly American.
MacArthur's occupation came in and imposed a constitution on Japan. But we didn't do it ourselves. True freedom, true democracy must come from within. I agree with many of the ideas, but the process was wrong. We should have done it ourselves.
All during the summer of 1946, the National Assembly debated and fought over the Constitution. Among its strongest supporters were 39 female representatives, newly elected when women voted for the first time in Japanese history. Strong popular support and the backing of the emperor secured passage of the new document. Finally, on November 3rd, 1946, the emperor officially proclaimed the adoption of the new constitution. It has never been amended, despite its foreign origins.
It was an American document, and every Japanese at that time knew it, and they know it today. So why has such a foreign imposition survived? The democratic ideas were not something that we brought to Japan. These democratic ideas were there. Many people paid very heavily for espousing them. The writers, the teachers, the artists, the labor unions, the women. There has been, I think, a tacit coalition among these groups